Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam,
And I'm Marcia.
and we like World War II media, and we want to talk about it. Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we're talking about the film Taking Sides, which came out in 2001. It was directed by Istvan Szabo and written by Ronald Harwood, who also wrote the play of the same name, which debuted in 1995. And it is based on the real interrogations that took place between a U.S. Army investigator and German musical conductor Wilhelm Furtwängler as part of the denazification investigations conducted in Germany at the end of World War II. What did you think of this movie?
Good question. I don't know. I thought it was interesting. I thought the acting was pretty good. I particularly like Stellan Skarsgård in this. I thought he was excellent. I don't know. It's such a weird film. It's a bit out there in terms of subject matter. I didn't know anything about this conductor, so I learned something at least. And I wasn't bored, but I also wasn't super into it. So, kind of so-so. I thought it had interesting takes, at least, about art and artists, and something that's still very relevant in my life today, and whether or not you can separate the man from the art and the other way around. So that was interesting, but I don't think it drove it home really hard, so I don't know if I like it or not. I'm still undecided. Maybe I'll figure it out by the end of this episode. How about you?
Yeah, there are definitely some major themes that they're trying to get at, but I don't know that they're handled all that deftly. I find it gets mired down in some places. It's a little on the nose in other places. You don't get a great sense of, I guess, the interior lives of very many of the characters. And I do think it probably works a lot better as a stage play because I can picture it, the majority of the film is this kind of battle of wills between these two guys in a small room, and it's very dialogue heavy, and I think as a movie, I was just kind of underwhelmed, if that makes sense?
Definitely does. But you know what it reminded me of a little bit, except that was much better, is the Sophie Shaw movie that we watched. In that it's the same kind of close quarters, except they drove it home so much better. So I would all recommend you to both watch that movie and also listen to that episode if you want a similar interrogation that is much more effective than this one.
Yeah, I'd agree, actually, that's a good point. That movie did a better job of handling these scenes that could easily get bogged down if they're not handled by, I guess, a director and actors and a writer who can manage to maintain tension in a scene that's just, two guys in an office.
So, part of the reason why I think it doesn't work quite as well is because Harvey Keitel, who is a pretty good actor, the way he plays his character is a little bit over the top sometimes, and I find him really annoying. I think I know what they're trying to do there. They want to make him this really serious interrogator who will stop at nothing to take this guy down, but I don't think it works that well.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that the playwright is perhaps a little more sympathetic to Furtwängler than he is to the opposite idea, than he is to the American who's trying to be like, yeah, you were involved in the regime, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we see that in the fact that the two supporting characters are very sympathetic to Furtwängler as well. And I don't think the American comes off very well, but I don't know if that's a problem with Keitel's acting so much as the playwright doesn't give him a lot of the I guess if you're having two guys argue with each other, doesn't give him a lot of ammunition.
No, that's true, and they also make him seem a little bit, I don't want to say unlikable, but the supporting characters don't like him very much, which makes him immediately unlikable to us as an audience, because we are supposed to be rooting. I don't think you're meant to root for him as much as you would have if he'd been written as a, I don't know, he's just not very friendly, he's a bit annoying, I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting though because it gets us to talk about this stuff, so that's what I like about it, I suppose. It does make you think, like, what were they trying to do with this film? And I like that about it.
Yeah, for sure. I guess you can say that about it.
Alright, are you ready to get into the plot?
Yeah.
The movie opens in Vienna in January of 1945, and we meet the quote unquote main character, famous conductor Wilhelm Furtwängler, played by Stellan Skarsgård, as he is conducting Ludwig von Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, the very well known symphony, when yet another Allied air raid stops the performance. Like, you can see all the musicians look up nervously and he keeps conducting. He's like, I'm not gonna let that stop me. But everybody else looks pretty nervous.
I listened to this podcast called Presto Music Classical Podcast, and they have an episode on Furtwängler, but the majority of it was just about his music rather than his controversy surrounding him, I guess. And so they would play like bits and pieces of pieces that he's conducted, and then they would dissect them. And they talked a lot about how, as a conductor, he was into spontaneity. He didn't seem to want a lot of precision from the instruments. And so, because of that, sometimes there are these moments that are great strokes of brilliance, but he wasn't as perhaps consistent as some other conductors. And they talked about how his music really tries to bring in a sense of nature and give you the experience of like you're in a big open space, you're in the great outdoors kind of thing. I don't know a lot about classical music, so I thought that was really interesting. But then I thought back to this scene in the movie, and as the Allied bombs are coming down outside, you really do kind of get this sense of like almost like a thunderstorm, sort of starting to like crescendo a little bit. I don't know. I really enjoyed watching that scene, and as you say, all the musicians getting increasingly nervous as they hear the bombs falling closer and closer outside.
It's funny you should say that about the thunderstorm because visually they also make it look like a thunderstorm. Like, it's like you're looking at clouds and you see like the lights of the searchlights going around the church that they're playing in. I think it's a church. And it's just this really atmospheric, kind of really cool opening scene.
Yeah, definitely. So the power goes out, and Furtwängler gets hustled into another room, and a minister in the Nazi government comes to his dressing room to advise him that he should probably go abroad and escape the war. And we will later learn that this is Albert Speer, munitions minister. And this is a timely warning, in fact, that the Gestapo has Furtwängler on their hit list because at this point, very, very late in the war, this is when the government is really starting to crack down on, we'll call them German liberals. And so Furtwängler flees to Switzerland.
It made me laugh because it has that kind of typical line that says, "You look tired, you should go away."
Yes.
And I didn't catch on that this was supposed to be Albert Speer until they say it later in the movie. But Albert Speer is such an interesting character from history. I would love to do a deep dive on him sometime because they called him the good Nazi, I think, at some point. Like, he's gotten that nickname.
Yeah, well, I think he was one of the ones who tried to go behind Hitler's back and,
Yeah.
negotiate with the Allies prior to the end of the war.
Wasn't he also the one, and we talked about this in the Nuremberg episode, I guess, that wrote a letter to Hitler saying, "Look, man, the war's over. You've lost. Give it a rest."
Well, and the other thing too is that when Klaus von Stauffenberg, as we discussed in our Valkyrie episode, when him and his guys were going to overthrow the government and form a new government, they had actually envisioned that Albert Speer would be the head of the new government.
Interesting. Yeah, I forgot about that. So that's 3 episodes for you to listen to already. Go and have fun. The film then jumps to sometime after the Allied victory in 1946. U.S. Army General Wallace, played by R. Lee Ermey, tells Major Steve Arnold, which is our main character, played by Harvey Keitel, to ferret out anything that will damn Furtwängler in his denazification hearing. He says, "Find Wilhelm Furtwängler guilty. He represents everything that was rotten in Germany. They really want to nail him. They need a win."
Right. Because Furtwängler was quite famous. Maybe it's hard for a lot of people to imagine now, but, conductors were conducting a lot of music that was quite mainstream that a lot of people would have known, and so he was really a cultural figurehead in Nazi Germany. If you take him down, you kind of make an example. And this program of denazification, it was pretty all-encompassing. It spanned from the famous Nuremberg trials, which we talked about in our Nuremberg episode, to the dispersion of Nazi groups and the removal of leading Nazis from power. So Germans were required to fill out a questionnaire where they detailed their activities under the Nazi regime, which we see in the film, where Furtwängler and all the members of his orchestra have filled out this questionnaire that Keitel has, and then they would be classified in terms of the severity of their offenses. So, major offenders would face penalties such as imprisonment, hard labor, or death, while lesser offenders faced restrictions on their rights or possibly fines. And Eisenhower estimated that this denazification process would take 50 years. And initially, both sides, the Western powers and the Soviets, were pretty gung ho about this. And from the period of 1945 to 1950, the Allies would hold 400,000 Germans in internment camps for this purpose. But eventually, the political will to complete this process petered out, as we've discussed briefly on other episodes, and the program ended in 1951.
Those are so many Germans to keep in an internment camp, but I guess they've got space for it.
Yeah, and I think it was a big job because something like 10% of all Germans were card carrying members of the Nazi Party. So then, how do you sift through the ones who are deemed worthy of punishment? How do you separate out the ones that you need to run the post war German government? It was a pretty massive undertaking.
And how do you then, and I think that's relevant to the film, how do you then prove that they're actually guilty is another thing. Like, you can be a card carrying member of the party, but to convict these people was not as easy as it sounds.
Yeah, for sure.
Meanwhile, on the other hand, at the Soviets, they hold a quite a different view in the movie at least, because Arnold meets up with a Russian colonel called Dimshits, and he makes a joke about it really in the movie. He's like, Dimshits? That's his name. And Dimshits is played by Oleg Tarakov, and he's the head of the Leningrad Museum of Art and a fan of Furtwängler. He's consistently tries to persuade Arnold to give up Furtwängler to the Soviets because they want him as their conductor.
Yeah, in real life, they offered Furtwängler the position of director of the Berlin State Opera, which was located in the Soviet zone of Berlin. And this is kind of interesting because while it's true that both sides, and when I say both sides, I mean the Western powers and the Soviets, seized the opportunity to recruit scientists and other quote unquote great minds of the German Reich. I mean, Werner von Braun is a famous one, and Operation Paperclip in the States. By and large, the Soviets were much stricter about denazification than the Western powers. So I thought it was kind of interesting that really the only portrayal of the Soviet perspective that we get in the film shows them as being quite willing to let shit slide as long as they can get this guy on their side.
It just made me laugh when there's a scene that happens slightly later in the movie where Arnold and this guy, Dimshit, get blasted drunk and he tries to once again persuade Arnold to let him have him. But Arnold isn't having none of it. He's very determined to take this guy down.
Yeah, for sure.
I do like the actor though. I thought it was a fun role, but maybe a little bit too fun. It should be a serious subject, and he made it kind of funny. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be funny.
Right. Yeah. Arnold sets himself up in an office with Lieutenant David Wills, played by Moritz Bleibtreu, a German American Jew who serves as liaison with the Allied Kommandatura Cultural Affairs Committee, and Secretary Emmeline Emmy Straub, played by Birgit Minichmeyer, and she's the daughter of an executed member of the German resistance. The Kommandatura was the governing body of post war Berlin, administered by the US, the UK, and France, who were the Western powers, and the Soviet Union. It was subordinate to the Allied Control Council, which was kind of a similar thing, but it governed the whole country. And decisions were supposed to be made unanimously, but the three Western powers were frequently at odds with the Soviets, and eventually the Soviets packed up and bailed in 1948.
I do like the supporting characters. I thought it was interesting that we got another woman with proper dialogue, thought, and something to do. And there's this tension between her and Arnold, who keeps insisting that she calls him Steve, and she just completely refuses the entire time. And that's I think a bit of a theme in this movie as well, is that Arnold is trying to make himself liked by these two people that are working under him, and they just don't really want to. There's just tension between them the entire time, though with Wills it's less obvious than with our female character. But yeah, I just wish their opinions weren't so, I don't want to say shallow, but they could have had a little bit more depth to their convictions. It felt a little bit surface level. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say, but I just wish there was a little bit more to it.
Yeah, I mean, we really don't know anything about these characters other than that Wills is Jewish, which is relevant in this situation because they are trying to determine which Nazis are guilty of what. and Emmy's father was killed as a member of the resistance. Like, that's the only bit of their background that we get. So it's
Yeah.
a kind of struggle to parse any, like, nuance or complexity in their characters. I really think they're trying to set up this dichotomy between, like, American and German culture. Arnold is kind of overly familiar. He's the guy who comes in and he's like, "Hey, I'm Steve, put her there." And these 2 other people, I mean, Wills is American, but he grew up in Germany, and so they're a little more, like, formal and old-fashioned, and as the movie goes on, there's, more of a rift between they seem to kind of sympathize with Furtwängler and understand what his life was like under the fascist regime, whereas, like, Arnold is totally, can't put himself in Furtwängler's shoes.
Yeah, yeah. It's such a shame. It has so much potential, but there's so little besides the interrogation room that it just doesn't really get to where they're trying to go. I can see very clearly what they're trying to do with all these characters. But it just remains this really surface level thing because we don't ever see them really beyond this interrogation room and this setting that is very limited.
Yeah.
Arnold questions several musicians. We see them kind of coming in one by one and all very nervously sitting down and being questioned. And many of whom know of and praise Emmy's father because they all turn around. When she says her name, they all turn around and are like, "Are you a relative of?" And then she just kind of fills in that that was her father. And then they also, almost all of them also make a point to say that they saw Furtwängler refuse to give Adolf Hitler the Nazi salute. And one of these people is the second violinist Helmut Rode, played by Ulrich Zucker. And they all say, "We have never been a member of the party." Like, obviously they would say it, but they also seem very convinced. And most of them mention that Furtwängler went out of his way to save Jews wherever possible. We don't ever get a proper example of this in the movie, but they all say it.
Yeah, and then I feel like it just immediately gets bogged down in so much other stuff, like, when we when we talk about later about how, like, Furtwängler is supposedly a womanizer and stuff, I'm like, "What it" like, it's just hard to keep everything straight. You're like, "Okay, what did he do or not do?" Like, that's relevant to the situation.
Yeah, it's a weird turn of events for sure to use that as a way to condemn him too. Like, so what if he was a womanizer? That doesn't make him guilty of the crimes that you're trying to condemn him of.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be better because I do really like the subject matter. It's different from a lot of other stuff we've seen. So I thought the premise was interesting, just the execution, maybe not so much.
Yeah, for sure. I kept being like, "Is anything gonna happen in this movie?" Arnold begins interrogating Furtwängler, and if you'll recall, his job is to put the screws to him, essentially. So he's demanding to know, why didn't you leave Germany in 1933 like so many other musicians? Furtwängler had many opportunities when he could have left Germany as well because he was traveling around, throughout the 1930s. And he's like, "Well, why didn't you leave? Why did you play on Hitler's birthday? Why did you conduct at a Nazi rally?" And Arnold goes out of his way to make the conductor feel uncomfortable and on the back foot, and all of his questions are very accusatory.
Yeah, I did like chuckle a little bit when both him, Furtwängler, and another musician were like, "No, it wasn't Hitler's birthday, it was the night before. No, it wasn't a Nazi rally, it was the night before." Like, if you're gonna say it was a different night, at least like say it was like 2 weeks before or something.
Yeah, it's this whole hair splitting thing too, right? Because it's like, Furtwängler did his best not to play Hitler's birthday, but then one year he played Hitler's birthday. I mean, he had to, there's a whole history to that, but it's also just like, well, what about this one time when he didn't do the thing? It's like really like,
Also, well, these interrogations are going on, we get a little silly romantic side plot between Lieutenant Wills and Emmy because they go dancing. And then Arnold shows up and also wants to dance, and Emmy's like, "No, gotta go." Wills is like, "I have to bring her home to her mother, I promise." So they avoid him like the plague. And then later they go on another date on a bicycle. And then they have some strong words because Emmy feels that because Wills escaped Germany before the war, he doesn't really know what it was like to live under regime. And so she says he's passing judgment on Furtwängler's decision to remain in Germany with the benefit of hindsight. It's this whole weird argument. And again, it's this thing where I know what they're trying to do, but it just doesn't work for me.
Yeah. No, I agree. And again, I think it's something that might work better in a stage play. I just feel like we're not getting perhaps the resonance that the writer intended.
I know, it's so character based, or at least dialogue based, but there's no depth to it whatsoever.
Yeah, for sure. The British discover archives with records of all German musicians kept by Hans Hinkel. Johann Heinrich Hans Hinkel was a Nazi who held key positions in the Reich Ministry of Propaganda and the Reich Chamber of Culture, and he played a leading role in erasing Jews from German culture. He was imprisoned after the war from 1945 to 1952, partly for the theft of Polish cultural treasures. Just one in a long string of Nazis who didn't actually appreciate art in any way, shape, or form. Anyway, so he had records of all the German musicians, and Arnold is able to get access to those records. And during their research, the little team discovered that Helmut Roda, the second violinist that they've been talking to, was in fact a Nazi Party member, even though he'd said he wasn't. And so Arnold goes to see him and pressures him to give up any information that he has about Furtwängler. Rhoda's a real character. I mean, he talks about how he only got the opportunity to become a member of the orchestra because all of the good Jewish players were gone. Like, great, good job, dude. And he really doesn't want Arnold to announce to, his new potential employers, etc., that he was a member of the Nazi party. He basically tells Arnold all of the damning stuff he can think of about Furtwängler, which gets boiled down to he was a big womanizer. He was super professionally jealous of this much younger composer named Herbert von Karajan, who's disparagingly called Little K by Furtwängler. And there's also a rumor that Furtwängler sent Hitler a birthday telegram.
It's crazy, man. It makes me wonder how much of this stuff was actually true and how much was just made up by this guy. But I'm sure some of it was true, like, I have no doubt.
Well, I think Furtwängler was well known for being quite jealous of other key players in his field.
Another rumor that also got told here is that he sent a music critic that had poorly judged his conducting to to the Eastern Front to fight the Soviets, and he never returned. So that's another spicy thing.
Yeah, it's weird. I didn't see anything about that when I was doing my research for this, so I don't think that it's true, but it was a strange situation because Furtwängler was someone who tended to clash with the Nazis, by and large, not on policy matters, but for example, when they started to pass these laws that would take the Jewish players out of his orchestra, Furtwängler got quite upset because he was like, "Well, all of my best players are Jewish, so you're going to actually negatively impact German music if you take them away." And there was another time when he clashed with Goebbels over he wanted to play this modernist composer, and Goebbels said that he couldn't. And Furtwängler was like, "Well, then I'll resign from the Reich Chamber of Music." And Goebbels was like, "Good, do that." So he did have some little clashes with the Nazis. I don't know about this thing about him getting someone sent to the Eastern Front, but I do know that Hitler and Goebbels were quite fond of him as a musical figurehead to the point where they allowed him some latitude that they might not have allowed other public figures.
Does sound like Furtwängler was more concerned about the actual music than he was about the Jewish people. Like, he was more concerned about his orchestra and they just happened to be Jewish than he was about the fact that actual Jewish people were being mistreated.
Well, quite, right? And there's a part in the movie where the Keitel character, Arnold, says something to him to the effect of like, "Okay, so you were saving Jewish musicians. Well, then you knew that there was something to save them from. Like, you can't be out here saying that you didn't know how bad it was," kind of thing. And it's like,
Yeah,
yeah, for sure.
I thought that was actually a good line from the movie. It's quite like there's bits and pieces in there that's quite good. There's other bits and pieces that are too on the nose. So it's got both. Like it's trying, but it's not really succeeding. The next time Arnold interrogates him, Furtwängler recites from a piece of paper that he's written that he might have been a little naive. Like you can see him trying to panic a little bit and trying to defend himself. Arnold won't have any of it, and he presents his newly found evidence that he got from the second violinist, And that's when Lieutenant Wills gets kind of upset and defends the conductor as the interrogation gets more heated. And this whole situation is very uncomfortable, and then both Wills and Emmy storm off. And Emmy says she'll quit her job. And that's when Arnold shows her the images from the concentration camp that we also saw in the Nuremberg movie that was shown at the actual Nuremberg trials, and she can't really look at it, but it doesn't stop her from storming at it anyway. They kind of feel that he's being too harsh on this brilliant man who's by and large the best conductor they've ever known, and that's why they respect him, and they think that Arnold just doesn't understand what it was like to survive in fascist Germany.
I laughed because Emmy says she's gonna quit, and then Wills is like, "But you can affect more change by staying. Like, what good will it do if you leave?" And that's so on the nose because that's what Furtwängler's been saying about why he stayed in Nazi Germany.
And also, what good is she gonna do as a typist?
Lieutenant Wills comes over to Arnold at the bar and asks him to treat the conductor with more respect, and then they have this whole conversation about separating the art from the man.
Arnold gets upset with Wells because he's not upset enough about the fact that there's this Nazi guy, and aren't you Jewish? And shouldn't you hate him more? It's interesting. I thought it was an interesting scene. Again, not didn't quite hit as hard as it should have, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I will definitely talk more about Furtwängler's legacy later, but he's a controversial figure, right? Like after the war, he had Jewish musicians who really supported him, but there were quite a lot that refused to play with him, and he was not allowed to conduct in the US. His actions definitely felt a certain way to some Jewish people and a certain way to other Jewish people.
I was thinking earlier today about separating the art from the artist, and one of the examples from modern day that I constantly think about is when an R. Kelly song comes on the radio, and I'm like, can I still enjoy this song? Well, it's written and sung by such a douchebag. It's like, it's shitty, isn't it? And you're like, no, I don't really enjoy it anymore. It's like Harry Potter all over again. It's completely ruined because the person behind it is just a person of very questionable morals. I just can't enjoy it anymore. Like, I think I've changed in that regard a little bit. Like, I used to really want to still enjoy the art. Now I'm like, wait, but if the artist is a bad person, that does diminish the art for me, definitely.
Right, because 'cause you're like, how much of their own ugliness did they pour into that art, first of all, that perhaps I didn't notice because I didn't know what kind of person they were? And then, like, what was their intentions when they made this artwork? And
Yeah.
yeah, no, I agree, it totally kills the spark, but, obviously, it's, like, a major debate publicly. People are constantly talking about, whether you can have one and not the other in terms of the art and the artist.
Uh, in the final interrogation, there's a bunch of them. But in the final one, Arnold plays a recording of Anton Bruckner's Seventh Symphony, the version that's been conducted by Furtwängler, and then reminds him that this exact recording was played on the radio after Hitler's death. He confronts Furtwängler with his anti-Semitism, and they have a big argument about bravery and living in fear. And then Arnold turns around to Emmy as he's talking about her father, and he says, Emmy, you have to listen, I'm talking about your father. And that's when she reminds Arnold that her father only joined the plot to kill Hitler after they knew they couldn't win the war anymore. Which is another reminder to go and listen to our Valkyrie episode because we talk about this a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And the fact that this Furtwängler recording was played on the radio after Hitler's death shows us how deeply intertwined him and his work and the regime were. He was someone who I don't think had deeply developed political views. He was one of those people that grew up conservative and then was so accustomed to that being the typical belief of people around him that he just never really questioned it. He was just like, I agree with the status quo, ergo, I'm kind of apolitical. And as we talked
Mm.
about, he was always more about like the importance of music rather than like the importance of government policies. And it's like, how apolitical can you be in a fascist regime? If you go along with the status quo, that too is a political choice. So I think that, putting this in front of this guy, and even when we talked about Klaus von Stauffenberg, even he at the beginning was like, maybe this Hitler thing is not the worst because they had him both von Stauffenberg and Furtwängler did have some kind of like proto National Socialist views, right? They were both big German nationalists. In Furtwängler's case, he was a big proponent of German culture. Both men, a little bit later, were deeply disturbed by Kristallnacht, and so that's when they started to be like, well, maybe. But a lot of their political views were about we don't like what Hitler is doing to Germany. And we don't believe that he's advancing German interest in a way that's consistent with German honor and values. And so that's not to say that like neither man cared about the Holocaust, because as I said, they were both very disturbed by Kristallnacht. As we said, Furtwängler did reach out to assist Jewish musicians, but it just simply wasn't like the core tenet of their political beliefs. And so, yeah, I think it's like really complex, and I don't think it's unreasonable for Arnold to be putting this in front of him and being like, look, your career really did a lot to advance the Hitler regime's interest in terms of promoting German artwork abroad.
And they could have chosen any other conductor, but they chose him. Like, it's a very deliberate choice to play that piece of music after Hitler died. And another thing that I find interesting is with him saying he was apolitical, even in the movie, he then kind of comes back to that. And it's like, maybe it is political a little bit. But in history, art has many times been a weapon of politics. It's been very political. And that makes it so interesting to have this musician say, look, I'm apolitical. I'm like, no, you're not. Music has always been this thing of resistance too, but he's using it on the other side for the regime. Even though he can say, I didn't do it for the regime, but the regime still used it. So it became this political thing. It's really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. In a voiceover, Arnold explains that Furtwängler was exonerated at the later hearings, but boasts that his questioning, quote unquote, winged him. It's like, yeah, winged him. The conductor was never allowed to conduct in the US, but he had a successful music career in Germany and died in 1954. Little K, his rival, succeeded him as conductor of the Berlin Philharmonic after his death.
Yeah, this whole voiceover was so lackluster to me. It's so nothing in the grand scheme of things, like nothing. So what he couldn't play in the US? Boo-hoo.
Yeah, and also Furtwängler walks out after the interrogation, and then Wills puts on a recording of one of the concerts that Furtwängler, like, conducted, and then it's just I don't know, you're like, "What?" And, like, why couldn't there be an end card about, like, denazification more broadly or whatever? You're just kinda left with, like, what's the context of this? Like, what is the importance of this?
It feels very unsatisfying at the end, for sure. And I also don't like that it ends kind of. It feels like a win for this Furtwängler guy. It doesn't feel like, oh, we got him, we bring him. No, no, you didn't. You only maybe slapped him in the face a little bit. You didn't really defeat him or anything. You have no proof of anything. He's
Yeah.
still out there making music,
Yeah.
pretending he's apolitical, and it's annoying. I mean, you can be a genius, but you can still be an asshole. Those things don't have to be mutually exclusive.
Right, and you can be a great conductor and not be a genius,
That too, yeah.
I do think he was really politically naive, which is, not an excuse, but the official charges against him were minor. They included conducting two official Nazi concerts in 1938, including on the eve of the Nuremberg rally, if I'm not mistaken, and accepting the honorary title of Prussian state councillor, which he actually tried to resign from in 1934, but Goering was like, no, not allowed. So he ended up being cleared of these charges, but to this day, there remains significant controversy around his name. So, on the one side, he did often push back against the Nazis when they attempted cultural suppression. He offered assistance to Jewish musicians to get out of the country in a lot of situations. He attempted to avoid performing in occupied countries. He would protest Nazi insignia being on display in his concert halls, and he avoided doing the Nazi salute. Himmler actually wanted him thrown in a concentration camp because he was such a public figure, and to even politely push back against the Nazi regime was not really acceptable, but because of his popularity and because of his value to the Reich, he was protected by Hitler and Goebbels. And, so on the other hand here, like despite all of those things that he did to push back against the regime really reveled in using him as a major cultural figurehead. He traveled the world as a cultural ambassador. He helped to prop up a positive perception of the Nazis as supporters of art. And he could have left Germany and resisted the regime from the outside, but he chose to remain and allow his work to be used by Hitler's government.
It's kind of like sticking your head in the sand. Like, I'm just gonna pretend this whole shit isn't happening. I'm just gonna conduct, make my music that I love doing, which is fair, which I care about, which is also fair. But at the same time, you're not really resisting as much as you could.
Yeah, for sure. In his own words at the closing of his trial, he said, I knew Germany was in a terrible crisis. I felt responsible for German music, and it was my task to survive this crisis as much as I could. The concern that my art was misused for propaganda had to yield to the greater concern that German music be preserved, that music be given to the German people by its own musicians. And German Jewish composer Bertold Goldschmidt countered this, calling him a great conductor with a weak character, a man who should have left and who had to have been aware of how much prestige his work gave the Nazis.
Right, right. And he cares about German music, but he cares mostly about his own German music that he's conducting.
Yeah, exactly.
The movie ends with real footage of Furtwängler at a concert as he's shown shaking hands with propaganda minister Goebbels after a concert, and the conductor then surreptitiously wipes his hands on a club after touching him. They repeat it over and over again, the same moment. And you can see that and look and say, look, he's wiping his hand, he's disgusted by this guy. Or you can just say, look, this guy's just been conducting for an hour and a half and he's kind of sweaty. Who knows, right?
Well, and I think Furtwängler probably was disdainful of Goebbels, like he was of a lot of the leading Nazis, because they pretended to be these big connoisseurs of art, but they really didn't know shit about art. And they
Hmm.
really, they would do things that dramatically impacted the German art scene, and everything had to be, in service to the Reich. So I genuinely believe he probably was really disdainful of Goebbels, but whether that makes him a big resistance figure to the German regime, like, I don't know if I'd go that far. Man, it's funny. The whole time that Furtwängler is really nitpicking about his activities, where he's like, "Yeah, I didn't play Hitler's birthday. I played the night before," or like, or I avoided playing Hitler's birthday for 3 years by saying I was sick, but then Goebbels came and threatened my doctors, so they said that I was fine, and then I had to play or whatever, like, all these things are very, like none of that would have happened if you had left Germany in 1933 with everyone else. It's like, your
Yeah,
decision to remain behind because you were too vain to give up your career is, like, the reason why you got railroaded into doing all of this work for the regime, and it's like, I don't know. I mean, I guess we can give him his flowers in terms of there are Jewish people who survived the war because of him, and, like, obviously we can't lose
yeah.
sight like, that matters. But yeah, also, it's just like, man, he sure gave the Nazis a lot of legitimacy from his work.
I will give a quick compliment to Skarsgård's acting of a man who looks very, very tired the entire time. He looks the way he acts with his eyes only in this movie almost. Like his eyes are just very like guarded and tired and emotional. And I think that was great. That was one of the best parts of the movie.
Yeah. No, I agree, definitely. I think he did a great job.
We have a tiny, tiny bit of notes. One of them was from something I found, and I haven't found any proof of this, but I saw it written somewhere that this film was actually shot with dialogue in German and English, but in the version released in the US and the UK, the dialogue is only in English. But there is apparently a German version out there somewhere.
I did remember remarking on this because in the scene where Wills and Emmy are arguing with each other and there's no one else around, they're arguing with each other in English, and I was like, "Surely, if you were having an emotional argument, you would do it in German."
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I did like that Emmy's actress was actually German, and I like that because she looks a certain way that's very German to me. And I don't want to be racist towards German people, but you can just tell that she is German.
Take your word for it.
I didn't like the romance. I thought it was kind of shoehorned in there.
Yeah. I mean, I get it why they put it in, but I don't think
Yeah.
it was strictly necessary, I suppose, although so little else happens in this movie.
True. Yeah, that's true.
So the title asks us, this taking sides, whether it's possible to separate art and politics, and certainly the characters around Furtwängler are forced to reckon with this. And I just noted down the question: do we think the movie answers its own question? And I don't really think it does. Like I said at the beginning, I don't think that the writer handled this topic particularly well, and I think he's potentially way too sympathetic to Furtwängler. I mean, you really come out of this being like, that American was a real asshole.
Right. I mean, after the character of Arnold answers the question, he says that it's impossible to separate the two. But then, because the way that he's written, you just think, God, this man is no fun and he's a dick and he's just annoying. So, how much value do you attribute to that point of view? Not very much, because all you feel is like, oh, this guy's not very nice, I don't like him very much. Whereas the other two characters are much gentler and they have their opinion is the other way around, but at least it's sort of nuanced. So their opinion immediately seems more realistic, even though I don't agree with it.
No, you're right. The movie, it tries to answer that question and then but in a way that just feels unfulfilling ultimately.
Yeah, I feel like there should have been a little more literally conviction in it, for sure.
Yeah, and I think I would have liked, as they're making this into a movie and it's not a stage play and they have the opportunity to have perhaps a few more settings, a few more characters, I wouldn't be mad if we got a bit more overall context about denazification. 'Cause I think just going into it without knowing, the broader context makes it, like, a little bit difficult to, quote, unquote, "take sides" the way the title asks us to do.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, the perfect place for that, if not in the actual movie, would have been an end card. Like, you had plenty of space to put an actual end card in there, even if you didn't put it in scenes. Like, it would have been better to have seen it in the movie itself as an actual scene. But as much as we make fun of end cards, they serve a purpose, and this one didn't really have one. It did have a sort of lackluster voiceover, though.
Yeah, and I think this movie came out long enough after the end of World War II that a lot of people would have been and are today unaware of what the rest of 1945 and 1946 and even throughout the rest of the 1940s, what that was like in Germany and what it was like to have the Western powers and the Soviets kind of jockeying for control and what that meant for the prosecution or non-prosecution in many cases of Nazis and that, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think what many people don't realize, and I certainly hadn't given it much thought before this movie, is that it wasn't only military personnel that was interrogated and condemned ultimately. Like, a musician has more value in a war than we think he does in this case. It's not as obvious, but it's propaganda is such a big beast, right? So it's so interesting to get that point of view, and I would have loved to see kind of more of it. I'm sure there's more out there that's slightly off to the side of the whole military operation, but that still had a very big impact on the war and people's perception of the regime and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, it's maybe because we don't know a lot about it that it feels so incredibly unsatisfying to get so little of it now.
Yeah, for sure.
Alright, so we have to rate this movie, but before we do, I would like to remind you that you can follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and you can write us a review. I would very much enjoy it if you did. Or you can send this episode to a friend.
Every time you send this episode to a friend, Harvey Keitel gets to act in a better movie.
What are we gonna rate this movie?
How many how many "You're a second violinist for a reason" out of 10 would you rate this movie?
I would give it a 6. You're a second violinist for a reason out of 10. Because I liked the subject matter. It got me interested in different side of the war that I haven't given much thought. I liked that it made me question things and it made me try to answer the questions that the movie's asking for myself. So I like that about it. I just didn't like the execution of the movie as much, or the fact that so little happens in it. I did really like to listen to some classical music for no reason today. I quite liked classical music, so it was quite nice. But yeah, it had so much potential and it just left me feeling very unsatisfied. How about you?
Yeah, big ol' meh from me. I think I'm gonna give it 5.5. You're a second violinist for reasons out of 10. Stellan Skarsgård is great. I think this movie attempts to be one of those thinkers, like a deep philosophical quandary that the characters are trying to navigate, but I just don't think it quite gets there or it quite articulates the message that it wants as effectively as it could. Yeah, I'd consider seeing the stage play. I'd see how that went. But, yeah, broadly, just, not that energizing or interesting of a watch, in my opinion.
Can you just imagine a stage play with like a full orchestra on the stage just doing their thing?
Gosh, yeah, I wonder if that's a thing they do.
I don't know. Are you reading anything new?
So I'm not reading anything new, but I'm about to go on vacation, and I will be taking Midnight in Chernobyl by Adam Higginbotham, which is, uh, what it sounds like. It's about the Chernobyl nuclear meltdown, so I'm excited to learn about that. And 7 Days in Hell: Canada's Battle for Normandy and the Rise of the Black Watch Snipers by David O'Keefe. So a little World War II in there too.
Does the name David O'Keefe sound familiar? Is that someone else that we've heard about?
Yeah, he was the Dieppe guy.
Yeah, did he do the documentary as well, right?
Yeah, that's him, yeah.
Yeah, cool. As usual, I'm not reading anything. I am making Stranger Things fan art this weekend.
Sweet. Can't wait.
Unrelated, but so cool.
Very cool.
Well, thank you everybody for listening. You can find us wherever you get your podcast. You can rate us 5 stars. You can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast, or you can visit our website www.rosietheReviewer.com. See you next week.
Bye.